Welcome back to Silicon Heartland Sessions, where we talk with leaders, builders, and change makers pushing the boundaries of tech, leadership, and innovation across the Silicon Heartland. Today's episode takes us behind the curtain of the March 2025 Cloud Nirvana Columbus Conference, where the theme wasn't buzzwords. It was real transformation. And our panel, they brought it. They spoke about what it really takes to drive change, about the culture shifts, the architecture rewrites, the trade-offs, and the tough calls. Not the slideware versions, but the scars and stories that came with it. So joining me are three leaders who represent very different but equally powerful journeys. Matt Randall, Senior Director of Engineering at Path Robotics. How you doing, Matt?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for being here, man. We've got Marlene O'Neill, VP of Infrastructure Services at Discover. Thanks for being here, Marlene.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And Scott Lesinski, VP of Infrastructure Products at Discover.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for being here, Scott. Yeah, man. Yeah, great to have you. Now, one quick note before we dive in. Pinal Patel, CIO at Viva Systems, was originally scheduled to join us today. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here, but we will reflect on some of his insights throughout our conversation today. So, should we get into it?
Go.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So Matt, I kind of want to start the conversation with you. So, at Cloud Nirvana, you opened your talk with what felt like a confession. Building, and here's the, how you laid it out. Building AI in the real world is hard, especially in robotics. And, many enterprise environments tend to be controlled, sort of sanitized spaces where inputs are clean, outcomes are predictable, and platforms are designed for well-understood use cases. But at Path, you're dealing with physical parts, edge conditions, unpredictable data, and on-the-fly decision-making. So what's the biggest lesson that you've learned about building platforms that have to operate in messy real-world conditions? And how do those lessons challenge what we often assume about AI readiness?
Yeah, for us is 100% being adaptable to the customers and their space, right? So we don't always have clean data centers. We have messy environments. We have environments that don't have any AC or any heat. And, if you live in Ohio, where we are, it's one thing to say, oh, yeah, it's hot. If you're in the middle of Guadalajara, it's hot, right? It's super hot. And so
No kidding.
Building the systems and knowing their constraints in a controlled environment, especially the physical constraints of, how does this work? How does it optimized? How do you cool it? And then you put it in the real world and you give it all the go that you can in your testing. But then once it really, really gets in the real world, then you find out like hot isn't as hot as you thought it could be. And dirty is a whole different word because some of these environments, they don't have walls. They have ceilings and maybe a wall in the back. Or it's construction environments, or there's metal shavings going in and out of things. And we do a lot of work to try to make sure that we design systems that are secure and conditioned. But in the real world, things change and you have to adapt because you can't just say, sorry, customer, that this isn't working. We'll just come back and try later. You have to go and it has to continue to move because if you're not moving and you're not performing, their product lines are stopping. They're not creating.
Yeah.
And so you are now into their ecosystem and their chain. And so we've had to learn how to adapt and keep moving and keep the systems as resilient as possible. And it changes every single day on us.
I believe it. And so for those listening that may not know what you do or Path does, Path builds robots for welding, for precision welding. Yes. And the way you're describing this to me, it didn't even occur to me. It sounds to me like you actually you deploy these robots in the field. You're not just welding at your warehouse.
They're in customer facilities, but the facilities aren't always, they're not like an office space. They're not a data center. They're not even an IT closet. It is on the floor, sitting next to whatever's it's sitting next to. It could be a press. It could be a welder. It could be whatever, and it has to be able to work in that environment.
And presumably, when you're shipping the robot out to a facility, all of the compute resources that run the models and so forth have to go with it as well, correct?
Right. Yeah, there is
that's
a
amazing.
small subset of compute that runs the operating model locally, because just like in any other manufacturing facility, if the internet goes down, the lines have to continue to work, right? So you have to build in that kind of robustness into your operating model. Do we interact with the cloud? Yes, we do things, but it's not critical. The critical pieces have to be localized and in that facility.
Right. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So, so Marlene and Scott, you're both coming from a regulated enterprise world. How does Matt's story of, scrappy real-time AI work in unideal conditions contrast with how Discover approaches platform risk or experimentation?
What's funny is I hear that and I think I make a joke about, what a mess something might be in a data center. And then I listen to Matt and I think I would be in the corner rocking if my data center sounded like his. So just the sheer, chaos that he gets to add into his tech is just fascinating to me, honestly, to listen to and go, wow, that's just a world I don't live in. But that said, in our world, things have to run. They have to be up all the time and they have to meet their SLAs. So we are, a highly regulated industry. We have, compliance and regulatory and risk. Those are all, not just top of mind. They are the top of everything we do, everything we think about, right? So, the contrast couldn't be more night and day, if you would.
I think you hit it. We have to understand our change control. We have to understand the risk we are going to put into anything we're doing, which I would say, Matt, you're still measuring risk, but there are certain places where your customer needs an outcome, and that outcome can be done through this. So you're figuring out how to make it happen, where we want to control our risk because our data and our information needs to be secure.
I agree. You're taking this conversation right where I wanted to go, Scott. Thank you. So you've heard the backdrop. So let's open this up to the group. One of the big tensions in transformation is between moving fast and building smart, building for the future. On one hand, we hear start small, experiment, iterate, and iterate your way into the future. On the other, we know that without a rock solid foundation, things like reliable data pipelines or scalable infrastructure, governance, and clear ownership, experiments either die quietly or create chaos when they scale. So here's the question. Can experimentation lead successful transformation, or do you need to lay that foundation first before you invite the chaos of innovation?
I suspect this answer is going to be very different between.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for.
You'd be surprised. One of the things that we, as a young Pat, we struggled with was amazing engineering, amazing talent. People could just create things. It's like, I can do this over the weekend. Boom, here it is. And it felt great at the time. But then to your point, Sean, the longevity of supporting that became a little problematic. And so, as we've matured as an organization, as we've brought people into the fold inside Path from different, walks of life, that is one of the things that we are stressing is there's got to be certain fundamentals of, do you know why you're doing it? And when it's done, is it actually production grade? It can't just be these little cool things, because they're fun. Don't get me wrong. Everybody wants to do the cool thing, but at the end of the day, the cool thing has to be able to be sold. The cool thing has to be able to be supported, and the cool thing has to be able to be expanded on, right? It has to be able to grow and mature and have a place inside your organization. And, even as a startup, we learned those lessons when we were younger. We're taking that, and kind of getting more enterprise grade opportunities to our engineers. And in all honesty, they've started to appreciate that kind of focus. So now that they see some fundamentals, they see how to focus a little bit differently. And so they ask questions differently, and we scale products differently now. And that growth has been fun to watch at Path.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. So essentially what you're saying is that, yes, you do have to lay a foundation first. But what you're saying is that that foundation needs to be the why.
Right.
People need to understand and make those decisions within the context of the why.
Right.
So, built into your innovation process, do you ask those questions and make sure that the folks, when they want to go innovate, they want to experiment, they want to try something new, that they have line of sight so they can, as you said, focus on the right thing?
Yeah, exactly. So not only do they need to know their why, but again, being a small company, it's a nimble set of engineers. And so you have to take them out of the engineering mindset and say, focus on, if you were the customer, you're the end user, use that as your starting mindset and tell me how this works from an operational standpoint. Like, I just want to use it. I don't know any of the tech behind it. Stop being this super uber engineer and think about the person that's running it doesn't actually care about your technology. They just want an outcome.
Great point, man. Scott, Marlene?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, sometimes, we lay a good foundation. Sometimes we have to really stretch to continue to drive innovation into our teams, right? And have them continue to look for what's next. What's that new piece of automation? What could make this, change the direction that we're going? And where does that make sense? So I think our stories are similar because you need to make sure you're creating a good foundation. You understand where you're going. You understand the why, but then you always want to be thinking of better ways to work as you go through that project or that initiative or anything you're doing.
The only thing I would add is I would say we have a very robust but rigorous path to production to go from innovation to a final product. And so, from a technologist, from an engineering mindset, that can feel stifling. And so that's the thing that we have to balance is, are we allowing, that kind of innovative mindset enough at the front end, right? So that's the difficulty with being in a very regulated environment.
Yeah, I hear you. On the one hand, you probably potentially slow down certain, avenues of innovation. But at the end of the day, you've got a clean data center.
Which is just there's no dogs. There's no dogs. And we have AC.
And you have AC. So, which is just kind of a funny way of saying, at the end of the day, that production quality, I'm not implying, Matt, that production quality and so forth isn't really important a path. Obviously it is. But in a highly regulated company, and in a company that is global and massive, and managing a significant portion of the world's economies, two very, very different worlds.
Well, it's interesting, Marlene, from the same side of like innovation versus regulatory stuff. So we're starting to go through looking at regulations for government entities. That'll lock you down real quick, right? And I've done that a couple times at companies. And so that was the first thing all of the engineering teams want to know is like, does that stifle me? Can I not do this? And it's like, slow down. There will be things that you have to now do differently. And then that's part of that transformation, whether it's on the product side or it's on the business side. This will be a transformation we will go through. These are how we'll step you through. But again, you have to be able to sell it and tell why we're doing it and what the business outcomes are. And then that's a process that we are just starting to go through here at Path. So It'll be interesting to see that journey.
That's exciting. Very exciting. Matt, your journey, it sits on one end of the spectrum. Lean teams, physical reality, speed over perfection. Marlene and Scott, you operate at the other end, global enterprise scale and regulation and stakeholder complexity. So for our listeners who might be somewhere in the middle, whether they're leading innovation inside a mid-sized company or navigating transformation in a traditional enterprise, what's your advice for how to approach innovation when you don't have the luxury of startup speed or enterprise resources? What's the mindset or strategy that helps, all of us to punch above our weight wherever we sit on the spectrum?
So I would, I think you already maybe mentioned it a bit, but it's, or maybe Matt mentioned it, it's know your why. So if you're going, Matt just mentioned he's going to be dealing, potentially with some government regulators, helping his team know the why, like what this does for his company. Why do they want to go after this work? What will this do for them? That helps folks kind of internalize it, and they can see themselves then in the work. And so knowing your why do you want to go after go after AI? What's it going to do for you, for your company, for your technologists, knowing that why, and then, marketing it. Right. And it feels from a technology perspective, that always feels like, why do I have to do this? Right? This is not what I signed up for as an engineer. But if you can't sell it, then you will probably potentially fail. Right. So you need everyone in your ecosystem all rowing in the same direction and all saying, we want to deliver this. This is what we want. And we know why we want to deliver it.
One of my favorite stories about knowing your why, and I think it probably came from Simon Sinek's book, is when with JFK, we were sending a man to the moon, and the president or somebody came and asked the janitor, what are you doing here for NASA? And he replied, I'm sending a man to the moon. Like everybody knows their why. From the janitor to the astronauts, so very powerful.
Absolutely. And the thing is, if you don't set that early, then you'll continue to have that conversation the entire time. Every week you will go back to, it will feel like Groundhog Day. Every week you'll go back and have the conversation again.
And telling it in a, to your point, Sean, like I'm sending a man to the moon. It's a very simple story that everybody can repeat. It is critical that when you're selling your why and everybody's locked in, that they can say the same thing and it has meaning to them. They understand what that is. They know why they're doing it. And it's a very simplistic statement.
Yeah.
They have passion towards
well said.
They feel like they are part of that mission, right? If you're part of a mission, then when that mission completes, you can say, I sent a man to the moon, no matter what it was.
And that's a really poignant point, Scott, how that connectivity and knowing your why does lead to passion, this human connection to what we're trying to achieve, the outcome, not merely the things that we're doing in pursuit of some outcome that might be blurry or missing altogether. So great point. So Marlene, you and Scott talked about migrating 1,200 plus apps with OpenShift and the importance of culture at Cloud Nirvana. But you also said it wasn't just about the technology. What surprised you most about the human side of that journey?
I'm not sure it's a surprise as much as it was reinforcing that people are people and change is hard, right? And so it is so much easier to stay right where you are. It doesn't get you very far, but it is an easier position to be in.
Yep.
And so, when things get hard, sometimes it's easier to just stay where you are. And so it's that, how do you get folks to keep going after the why and keep going after, I want to put a man on the moon.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, interestingly, when you're saying this, I want to ask that question. Is it because, making sure everybody understands the why? Bringing it all
Absolutely.
the way back.
And, with any of these journeys, you get, your early adopters, you get the folks who are your innovators. They're all in. They are so excited and they are ready to go, right? Put me in, coach. I want to go.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get into this, we'll let you have a couple of our, not so critical apps. And there you go. We'll toss you a bone, right? And then you start to get into this little, wait a minute, this is getting hard. This is getting a little harder. And, our business partners kind of want some other work for us to do. And so you kind of get into that phase.
Yep.
And so you really, again, that's the point at which that kind of difficult middle, where knowing your why matters and having everybody on board, that's when it pays off. That's your payoff time right there. And then it pays off again at the very, very end when you're down to like 3 apps.
Wow.
And you hear every possible reason in the world why those 3 apps absolutely can't go. Right? There's some great reason, I promise you, why they can't. And that's the next time where that know your why and all that marketing will pay off.
Yeah. And to your point, no matter how much you remember your why and so forth, transformation is always going to be messy. There's always going to be things that happen along the way.
And then the last thing I would say on that, honestly, is, and this may be a little controversial, but sometimes burning the boats is not a bad idea, right? If you can't go backward, then there's also the only way is forward.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a point at which you kind of have to cut off the old, and you have to say, no, we are falling forward. That's what we're doing. Right.
Yeah. And for those that are listening, burning the boats is a phrase, referring to when you have a big transformation project. Do we have if you don't have a fallback plan, if it's just not reasonable to have a fallback plan, the only thing you can do is fall forward. You have to make it work, and you have to plan for those contingencies. So, wow.
I have to say, from an infrastructure perspective, there's the longer this takes, somebody somewhere, app dev and infrastructure, are maintaining two separate platforms the whole time. Yep. So think about the impact to your teams to do that. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so when you get down to the last couple that haven't migrated, it's like you're keeping teams of people, hardware alive, all kinds of things, licensing contracts, all of it going in support of a few.
Yeah. Yeah. So while we're on the concept of teams, so Scott, you emphasize the power of focus, dedicated teams, committed migration plans, but in big orgs, I think that's rare. So how do you manage to protect that space for execution?
Yeah. So we've talked about it a number of times. Understand the why, make sure everybody understands the why, and then use that to your advantage, right? When everybody understands where we need to go, then how do we get there, right? And that's how we got dedicated teams. We knew we had to get to the place of getting OCP into production. We then understood the scope and then made that scope to a team that could deliver it, right? And too often do we sometimes want to solve the problem by throwing it into many teams and saying, okay, do your part. What we looked at was what was the best thing for us. And the best thing for the teams, and staying motivated and continuing to understand that why, they were able to get it delivered because we were able to shrink the pool of people that had to be in the work every single day and be able to deliver it. The other big thing, and this goes off of Marlene's, the culture that came out of us was a learning culture, and we shared amongst other teams, right? So when that team figured out something and maybe we were down to the last three, there were multiple people from other teams in with the other teams trying to get them finished. Why? Because we wanted to get complete, and we weren't complete when Scott's team was just done. We were complete when the overall migration was done, and that was key. So
this is a huge effort, and for those that weren't at Cloud Nirvana, can you maybe tell us what OCP is?
So yeah, it's a container platform on top of AWS for us.
Right.
An OpenShift.
So using Kubernetes and OpenShift as the platform.
It's OpenShift Container Platform as OCP.
Yep. Gotcha. Thank you.
It's a Red Hat product.
So Matt, you've had to lead lean teams in fast-moving spaces. So what did you hear in Marlene and Scott's story that doesn't work in a startup? Because I know if I ask you what does work, you're going to go back to the why thing, which I love. But
so what's interesting at Path, again, 160 people in the company, right? And so it's interesting when you talk about we have organizations. There's an IT group here and an engineering group there and a software group there. We don't have that. We have engineers. Matter of fact, we don't have an IT group per se. There's a gentleman and this guy. You want a middle management being your IT guy? I don't know. So sometimes it's hard to find that struggle, that balance of how do you know where the resources are and how do you allocate things? And so similar to actually what was just said, it's focus. And so where we don't have organizational boundaries that stop us, we have focus that stops us. And so we've had to be very purposeful with, these are the things that we're going to do. Do not get distracted from those things, because there will be tons of opportunity for distractions. In the startup world, there's nobody also to tell you no, right? So
there's nobody to tell you no, but there's also probably many fewer guardrails as well.
Yeah. And so you can go off on tangents all day long if you really want to. And so focus has been our critical thing. It wasn't really worrying about organizational charts. It was worried about focus on the mission. And that's it. And that's hard. Even from an executive standpoint, just to be transparent, we have to remind everybody in the company that if we don't focus, we die.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So, you've all navigated transformation, some of it at the scale of hundreds of apps and hundreds of teams, and some of it in, fast moving, resource constrained environments, dirty environments. So, so here's the question. What's one principle or lesson from large scale transformation that still applies at a small scale and vice versa? So, whether you're leading change in a startup, a mid-sized org, or a Fortune 100 enterprise, what's a universal truth about transformation that leaders at any level need to remember?
Yeah. So outside of being the broken record about the why, planning.
Okay.
Planning is everything, right? Because if you're going to sell this thing and you're going to figure this out, you got to have a plan and you got to know the plan. And if you don't, you're going to plan it sometime. Do you want to plan it ahead and get everything kind of allocated and kind of come up with a couple what ifs? Or do you want to just go and then you're going to get into a scenario where you're lost or you're churning or you have people like Marlene said, it's like, I'm not doing it. And you're going to have to figure out plans then. So the earlier that you can come up with the focus of why and then plan it and really have a good solid plan that you can sell to the teams, that for us, that's kind of resonated a lot is being able to plan ahead of time.
So you bringing up the concept of planning, it leads me to wonder, when you're doing that planning, does Path use tools like, traditional project planning, software and writing of requirements and doing functional specs and so forth? Is that process and even like architecture diagrams? I mean, and even maybe having like an architecture review board, those kinds of things. Are those things relevant at Path Robotics?
They are becoming relevant at Path Robotics. If you would have asked me a year ago, no, just to be quite transparent, we were small enough, we could contain it. We knew what we wanted to do. But again, trying to relate it to a product mindset and an outcome for our customers. We've changed as we've kind of grown and matured. And so, we do have a product team. We vet out the plan. We vet out why we're doing it. And, we have a couple tools that we use now. Everybody's got their Atlassians or their Monday.coms or whatever you want to do. We do too. Are we perfect at it? No. Is it uncomfortable at times? Yes. But we're starting to go through that process. And it's been fun to watch everybody mature on that journey. For me, this is my first startup. So reminding me to act more in that startup mentality and less in the enterprise mentality. And then I'm doing the same with them and going, hey, quit acting so much as a startup. Get a little more mature. And that's the balance that's been fun to watch.
That's awesome.
Marlene, I like where you went. And, I think one of the other keys when you have a plan is to celebrate those wins, right? You're going to have key milestones and you need to show wins throughout that delivery. You can't just start it and then end it a year later or however long it's going to be. You need to be able to show the team that the work they're doing matters and what those outcomes give us, and tie those to true outcomes that the business is, benefiting from or security is benefiting from. Make sure you show that.
And I'd add to that, regardless of the size of company, the size of transformation, everyone has to agree on what success looks like. And you have to agree up front, minute one. And then one person that we work with uses the phrase done. So when are you really done? So everyone defines it a little bit differently depending on, the lens you're viewing this transformation through. But we all also have to agree, when are you actually done and how did you measure it? Right. So that's really key. And again, it doesn't matter how big or small you are.
Wow, that's amazing. So just to wrap up, what we said was, of course, start with the why. Matt also mentioned planning, the importance of planning up front, celebrating wins, and we need to agree on what success looks like and what does it mean to be done. Very, very salient advice. So thank you so much for that. So far we've explored some really powerful individual stories, from the realities of building AI in the field to scaling transformation across thousands of enterprise systems. But one of the things that we love about this podcast, this community, and the spirit of Cloud Nirvana is when those perspectives collide, because transformation doesn't happen in a silo. It happens, when teams are trying to balance culture and delivery, when platforms are being built faster than governance can keep up, and when new technologies like AI force us to rethink everything from architecture to all the way to accountability. So in this next segment, we're going to open it up. So let's zoom out and talk about where transformation really gets tested, when strategy meets constraints, when ideas meet execution, and when scale meets speed. So let's start with, this conversation with something simple, but I think is deceptively hard. One thing we heard throughout the conference is that transformation, whether it's about AI, platform engineering, or cultural change, isn't always stopped by lack of talent or tools. It's often derailed by competing pressures to deliver now and the need to build for the future. So let's begin here, and we'll ramp up from this foundation. So I'm curious, how do you all balance the need to build with the pressure to deliver? And what's the cost of doing too much too soon, whether it's in AI, infrastructure, or even team transformation?
I guess I would say too much too soon. And, I think that this is that insightful, but too much too soon and you kind of get nothing done, right? You spread everyone a bit too thin. They can't get deep enough to really do much other than scratch the surface of the tech. So I think you do have to have some focus, and you have to, we've overused the phrase "know your why," but again, it's like, what are you actually after? And set folks on that, at least loosely on that path.
Do you ever run into situations where, you've got an innovative project or initiative that's happening, and it might be getting too far ahead of where the organization is ready? Because there's two sides to innovation, at least in my opinion. There's the rapid innovation side of it, where you're testing new theories and so forth and finding things that might stick. But then when you find something awesome, and you want to go do it, then you got to meet the reality of sort of the much slower wheel, the operational wheel,
Well, the operational wheel as it relates to all aspects of operations, right? So can you support it, foundationally, but can you support it from your regulations, from your compliance, all of those pieces? And I would say, we run into that all the time. Like all the time. So we have technologists that are like, oh, wow, I want to go use a new tool, a new tech, whatever it may be. And they get really excited and they have use cases for it. They have really good business use cases for it. And then we've got to slow down. Now we've got to go catch up with our process, with our regulation, with all of those pieces. And that can be really frustrating for our technologists, like we talked about a little bit earlier with, innovation, speed.
Yeah.
But it's necessary. It's necessary, and it's important. And so sometimes the struggle is absolutely real, though.
I hear you. I mean, it's got to be tricky to find that balance.
Am I ever going to get this over the finish line? And how long have I been working on this? Right. So
I'll add on to one of Marlene's with an example that I had. So before going into infrastructure, I owned customer servicing platforms, and we were looking at different AI products to help our agents. Our business and us, we piloted a couple things, and we talked about this in the beginning. How far can you go in a pilot? How much can you get into production? Well, we got to a place of seeing that the outcome was successful. And then it was, how quickly can we get this to the rest of our area? And then came in the parts of the regulation. And, we talked about it before, focus. That was the key. When we all got focused on wanting to make this happen, we had to pull in the right teams. We had to bring architecture even further in, because we had to go through our architecture review boards. We had to bring in our AI council. right? And once we were able to get those approvals and those things through the way that they needed to be, then we can go and make that pilot a reality. But to Marlene's point, it was frustrating to a lot of people because we were there. We saw the part of the finish line, but we had to make sure we were following all of the right processes when we wanted to productionize it and make sure that we had operations that could handle it behind the scenes.
Well, I would imagine that, having leaders that are leading these initiatives that are, organizationally agile and understand who to go to and what the process is. Sometimes there are the formal processes, but then, there's always informal processes as well. And having folks who understand how to navigate that landscape and getting ahead of it sounds to me like that's an important part of, getting innovative things into production more quickly.
I think that's helpful. One thing I'd add, though, is that from a technologist perspective, and I was just talking to someone about this the other day, as technologists, we tend to see things before lots of other folks do, right? So, you can go to the Wayback Machine and talk about like email and texting and chat and all those things. And as technologists, we use them first and fast. And so we see the value, but then you get to an enterprise and the enterprise goes, I don't get it. I don't see the value.
Right.
Right. And you have to kind of wait for them to catch up. And the next thing you know, they go, oh, yeah, this is business critical suddenly. And it feels sudden, right? It's, it's slowly then suddenly. So from an enterprise perspective, I see, over the course of my career, I would say that I've seen that so many times. And I'm sure, Matt and Scott have seen this as well, where, it feels so slow from a technologist perspective. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh yeah, we can't live without it. And you're like, well, where have you been?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. When you talk about different types of organizations or enterprises, Scott, you kind of reminded me the difference between places I've been at Google. Once you even get the technology approved and you're trying to do something, let's say with AI in particular, you have to go to an ethics committee too.
Right.
Is it being used in the right way? And it's like, and I remember being at Google going, oh, really? I got to do this? It's about taking a spreadsheet and automating it. But okay, let's do it. And then at Path, there's nobody to ask. We don't have those teams. We're that nimble startup thing. So you have to stop. Everybody has to stop for a second and go, okay, you can't not figure this out. So who's going to take the lead on this?
Matt, do you ever find yourself in front of like an array of robots and just trying to talk to them and ask them their advice?
I do. I go out to the welder robot and I'm like, hey, Sparky, tell me something. Yeah, but it's interesting. We had to deal with that just this last week about turning on different co-pilot type agents for our software developers, and whether or not that, when we have our stuff, there's basic code, but then there's algorithms and things that are our secret sauce, our trademarks. And so I don't have a team. I don't have a legal group. I have to go find people to ask. And so those frustrations happen at every scale, whether you have a big team or whether you have no team, you still have to answer the question.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, I think you've got a really interesting story that you shared with us, before this discussion about, releasing a new capability at Path to the entire company without them being forewarned. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So so at Path, so again, for Path, people that don't quite know Path, we build autonomous robotic welding systems. And so the robotic welding system, all the software, everything has only ever known of one welder. So all the software is based on one robot doing a thing, and there would never, ever be more than one. Well, we now have more than one. And so that's what a big thing we've been working on for our customers is how do we get to these things at scale? And so nobody knew in the company. An hour before our all hands yesterday, we got it working. We actually had two robots simultaneously planning, learning, and welding all at the same time, which is a huge deal. But the fun part about Path being so small is nobody knew that it was done. And so at the very end of the all hands, I stopped the whole all hands. The CEO had no idea. And I was like, hey, I think we forgot something. Did we forget something? And we threw it up on the video board in front of everybody in the company and showed them welding for the first time, which is an amazing feat. It took the team so much time to get that done. And Scott, to your point, Having milestones like that makes the team's drive, makes it worth it in the end because everybody saw that outcome.
Yeah. Well, I have to imagine the why behind that was crystal clear. It goes right to your desire or your need to scale. Yep. That's amazing. So, while we're talking about AI, obviously AI, we're watching, one of the fastest moving technological shifts any of us have ever seen in our careers. But speed is only half the story, especially in enterprise environments. There's a parallel, push to govern, to build frameworks, to set up ethical reviews and secure data and manage risk. Obviously that's very, very important, but I think there's a real question here, one we don't ask enough in open conversations, in my opinion. And here's the question. So are enterprises trying to govern their way into AI adoption, layering on process and control as a prerequisite for innovation? Or is there still space to explore and break things, to learn by doing, even if it's a little messy? And more importantly, where's the line between responsible governance and innovation paralysis?
So I think you ask a really hard question there. Yeah.
Yes. Mission accomplished.
Well, you hit it. In a highly regulated company such as ours, you have to know the outcome somewhat. You can't just put AI into anything. I think Matt talked about it perfectly, even in a smaller company. Are you ready to put all your major information and some of your secrets into something that could really help you and probably help you pretty quickly? But are you ready to go do that with something you can't answer the why? Right. So I don't know if that gives you fully the answer, but, I think it's going to continue to pull on us in certain ways, and us have to understand more before you just put something into your environment. And it's even not AI, actually, now that I think through it. We're not going to go just put a patch in our production environment. We're going to test it out. We're going to understand what that patch has in it. We do examinations on it, right? So, we have to do that same thing, but this is a brand new way of working, and it's coming at us quick. So we've got to continue to learn as much as we can.
It reminds me of Michael Chory, and he's the guy that he's the fresh AI guy over at Wendy's, and part of what drove their direction was not obviously understanding the why, but really understanding the customer experience, in particular from an employee's perspective. And he'll tell the story about how, as they were building out Fresh AI, he lived in the restaurants and worked with the teams directly, which is pretty amazing.
That is the exact same thing that we do. I mean, we literally have people go out into the field at our customer sites, run our operating robotic cells with the customer, get the feedback, what is good, what is bad, because if not, you have your perspective, and it's always about perspectives. And so you got to know, the people that have never seen your tech before, when they touch it for the first time, and again, it's an outcome-based thing, is it helping them or not? And that's where we drive everything that we do at Path is we have to help that person, whatever that skill set is. We don't expect them to be hard code developers or know robotics or know anything like that. Push the button and go.
Right.
The thing I would add is that all of our industries, are looking at AI and how we may use it in the future, use it in our current products. It even has to be regulated as we bring it into our lower environments. So we need safe spaces where our teams can learn and grow, and get their hands dirty, right? And so that's still, for us, that's still in some ways regulated space. So you asked, does it stifle innovation? Maybe a bit, but it's important. It's very important so that we all get grounded in the how and the why and the, how can I learn and grow before I get it to a production environment. And that's true of any new tech. And I think this one is maybe even more important in this case.
Yeah.
Like there's so much opportunity here. And we want to make sure, again, we have that, we're able to take advantage of that opportunity in a really business forward way. And our teams have to be ready for that, but our industry has to be ready for it too, quite honestly.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is at the end of the day, no matter what the tech is, whether it was, are you moving to cloud or are you moving to AI? There's two things that you want to do. You want to protect the consumer and you want to protect the brand. 100%. It doesn't matter if you're regulated or not. Right.
Fair enough. And you can't just one day say, congratulations teams, here's the new tech, go put it in production. You've got to give your teams the opportunity to learn and grow.
Right.
And to fail in a really safe way. Right.
Right.
And that you don't want that failure to be publicly viewable.
Yeah. To me, one of the more impactful things that knowing the why brings to the equation. I mean, I know we like to think about it in terms of focus and so forth, but I really think that it also leads to empowerment. I think it enables us to build teams that are empowered. As long as we're all focused and we all understand what the why is, we have more empowerment within our sphere of influence within our job to have more latitude for things like creativity and innovation and so forth. At the end of the day, we all say that we want empowered teams that move fast, own what they build, make decisions, and push boundaries. And when things are calm, it's easy to say the right things and celebrate that autonomy. But empowerment gets tested when the pressure hits, when deadlines close in, when a rollout breaks, or like when tech debt catches up. That's where the idea of empowerment becomes a leadership choice, not merely a leadership slogan. So let me ask you this. What does empowerment actually look like when things get hard? When teams are under pressure or when something goes wrong? What are the things that slowly erode empowerment in a team? And how do you as leaders act to preserve it, especially in those make or break moments?
So I think one of the keys to empowerment is going to be trust, right? When things get hard, does the team around you trust that we're all going to be in this together? That if they make a decision because they feel empowered, that you're going to stand behind them as their leader. So, I think when you look through all of, leadership and transformation and, projects that move, you're going to have your ups, you're going to have your downs. But if you have trust with the working team that we're going to get to where we need to be, it gets you through those.
Yeah, I would maybe echo the same thing with a little different spin about transparency. Don't hide stuff from me. If it's good or bad, let's just talk about it. Because the more that we talk about it in the good times, the easier it'll be to talk about it in the bad times. And I've always said that, I will be as transparent as possible with everybody around me. I want them to be as transparent as possible with me, right? There are perspectives that maybe somebody doesn't understand or doesn't know. And so the more that we're transparent about this, the better. And it goes, engineers may not always understand the decisions that the executives made, right? And the executives may not always understand the decisions that a board member may make or a regulatory body may make. But the more that we talk about it and are transparent about it, then these conversations, they're going to be tough always, but we can get through them.
And I would agree with both those sentiments. I would also add that, empowerment is is a little bit like learning to drive, right? So everyone, at least in the US, right? So everyone learns what the road signs mean and what curbs mean and the lines in the road. And then at some point, someone tosses you the keys and you got to go, right? And sometimes, most days that works, right? Most days that works out just fine. And sometimes it doesn't. And so how are you going to react, when the day it doesn't, right? How are you going to show up that day?
Yeah,
right.
Really.
And that's, as leaders, that's, how do you want to show up? right? Are you gonna be the person that walks in and loses it? Are you gonna be the person that walks in and goes, all right, how do we learn and take the next step and move on, right? And what you plan for, what you practice for, all of those things, is that in that moment, it is not catastrophic in failure. Right. It is a fender bender. That's what you're after.
Well said. So this conversation, it sort of reminds me of have you ever read Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last? And and I'm kind of pulling on the thread, Scott, that you mentioned about trust and the importance of trust. In Leaders Eat Last, he talks about this book by L. David Marquet. The book is called "Turn the Ship Around." Now, he was the commanding officer of the USS Santa Fe, I believe. Well, I hope I got that right, as a previous Navy guy. Anyways, it was widely known as the least performing nuclear submarine in the Pacific Fleet, if not the world. And he brought a new leadership style to that ship and turned it into not only the top performing ship in the Pacific, but in the entire Navy. And his philosophy was, again, it all surrounds trust. And what he realized was that, especially in the military, the structure is very command and control, asking for permission and so forth. And he had this theory that, if he could create a culture that was not this leader-follower culture where people are expecting to be told what to do, he wanted to build a culture that he referred to as leader-leader, where everybody is engaged. And as we were going back to, starting with why and so forth, and having the latitude to be able to make the decisions within your sphere of influence. And I think there's a lot to be said for, leaders that, try to instill trust, not just with the things that they say, but the things that they do. So as an example, just really quickly, one of the small little tweaks that he made in his whole model was in the Navy, you have to ask permission to do anything. And he changed that. And just by changing the way in which people use these words made a huge difference. And what he did was when you want to communicate to me or you want to get permission to do something, I want you to come to me and say, this is what I intend to do. And he'll say, oh, okay, you go do what you're intending to do. And just making that one little change as opposed to what the normal, I'm asking for permission to do this, made a huge difference in sort of the cultural makeup of that ship. So I thought it was really, really interesting and poignant, given how we've talked about the why, the trust, empowerment, et cetera. Okay, so I got to tell you, this has just been a very powerful conversation. This has been grounded in truth and experience and leadership in the trenches. But before we go, I'd love each of you to share a final thought. What advice would you give a leader or a practitioner who's facing a big transformation? What should they hold on to or let go of as they take the first step?
Hitting the good questions at the end too. I like it. You know what? Let go of your pride. Let's start there. If you're in a growth mindset, you're going to have to change. And if you're in technology, you better be in a growth mindset because it always changes, right? And I've struggled with that. We're going with transparency. Yeah. Young Matt was not good at that. And even old Matt, has to remind himself, let go of your pride. Just because it worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to work now. Just because you were the expert in it at one time doesn't mean you're always going to be the expert in it.
Very true. Well said, man.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also with pride, know you're going to fail. Embrace it. Fail often, and then fall forward, right? So fail differently every time, and you're doing the right thing, but learn from it. Embrace it. Tell your whole organization about it. This team failed. Let's talk about how we learn from that. And so you don't have to do it too, right? But don't find it, don't let it be shameful that you failed. Let it be a point of how do we all learn from that and take the next step forward. So again, let go of your pride of ownership there, and just, I failed, and here's why and how, and learn from my fail.
Yeah, and I'll add on, look back in your toolbox. One of the things when I was starting the transformation with OCP, I went back to one of the first jobs I had, which was a project manager job, and really thinking about how and what I did in those days to be successful, and then use the people around you. There are so many people with certain skills that might not be the ones that yours, that shine for you. Find those people, make sure they're part of that project, bring them in early, and, create that plan, understand that why. And I think, you're going to have a successful project.
All right, man. Thank you, Scott, for bringing us all the way back around to where we started with the why. So, hey, Matt, Marlene, Scott, thank you for your transparency, your wisdom, and for modeling what real leadership looks like when the roadmap isn't clear and the stakes are high. So to our listeners, if you found value in this episode, share it with someone who's building something that matters. Subscribe, leave a review, and stay tuned for more real-world stories from the Silicon Heartland. So until then, lead with clarity, build with courage, and never stop transforming. Thank you all.